Alright, so in the last two videos of Istanbul, we talked about how to acquire rubies. Which was obviously the object of the game, was to acquire rubies. We also, in the very last video we also talked about almost all of the tile areas that you can go and visit. The only one we didn't talk about is the fountain, which we'll save for this particular video. But we're not going to talk about it right now. Let's talk about movement first, because that will make more sense when talking about the fountain. Now, when you decide to move, and everyone starts at the fountain first, when you decide to move, you can move up to 2 spaces. You can't move diagonally, but you can go like 1, 2. So this would be 2. If you were to move from the fountain to the Wainwright, that's 2, for instance. If you were to go here, that would be obviously 2. This would be 2. This would be 2. This would be 2, this would be 2. So there's definitely some spots you can't reach on your first turn. You can't reach the Sultan's Palace. You can't reach the gemstone dealer on your first turn. I guess technically, if you had the money and the resources, you could go to the police station here, and they could go for you. But you get the point that there's definitely some spaces you won't be able to make on your first turn. And obviously, the black market, you're not going to reach on your first turn either. So, anyways, or the Great Mosque, you're not going to reach that one either. But anyways, when you take your turn, you can move up to two spaces. So let's say I first wanted to go let's just say I wanted to go to the post office first. Well, I could move 1, 2 spaces, so I could go here, okay? That would be 2 spaces. That would be my movement. Now, before I take the action, I must first drop off an assistant, okay? Because I'm a merchant. My merchant is going to help me out at the post office. So I have to drop him off to take the action. So now I've just dropped him off. I dropped off one of my assistants. And you'll see that I have actually only 4 assistants. There is a way to get an additional assistant, but that's with one of the tile abilities, okay? So we'll talk about that one later. But that's how many you're going to have for the game. You're only going to have 4 assistants in order to take the action. That's what you're going to need. So you can continuously move around the area, but if you don't have any assistants, you won't be able to take the action. But I did. So I took my action, I went here, I dropped off an assistant here at the post office, so I could take the post office action. Then, later on, now on my next turn, let's say I wanted to go to the, let's say I wanted to go to here, to this location here. If I wanted to take the action here, I'll also have to drop off an assistant to take the action at the caravan. Sorry. Okay? But I don't have to, if I don't want to take the action, that's an option. This is optional. If I was to stop here and decided I did not want to take this action for whatever reason, I would not have to drop off an assistant to take, because I'm not taking the action. I would not have to do it. I would not have to drop him off because I'm not taking the action. That's something to note. Meaning, if I wanted to skip this one so I get to another place better, that would work out well for me. Okay? Now, another thing is eventually you'll come down to a point where you won't have any, assistance. You'll come to a point when you'll have taken this action or wherever place you were at, and you now only have the merchant. You can still move the merchant around. He just won't be able to take any actions until he can acquire an assistant back. Now, this is how it's going to work. There are a couple of ways you can get assistants back. But first of all, one thing to note about movement is, let's say I took this action here, the Wainwright action, okay? And I had the 7 money, etc., etc. I took the action, I leave the assistant here. If I was to take my next turn and go, to the tea house, obviously I'm not going to be able to take the tea house action because I don't have an assistant. But then on my next turn, after that, if I came back to the Wainwright, you know, I could actually pick him up. I could pick the assistant up, okay? I wouldn't take the action, but I could pick him up, okay? Which is interesting. So let's say I was not, let's say I didn't go to the tea house. Let's say instead I went to the gemstone dealer, and then on my next turn, I came to the wing right. I could pick up my assistant I left there and move on to my next location. And then I could either, you know, take my action, leaving my assistant here at the large market, and then I'd be back to square one, obviously. Or, you know, I could not take my action at the large market and instead move on, picking up another assistant along the way, and then maybe dropping off an assistant here at the police station to take my action. So there's a lot of strategy and management of your assistants and getting around in movement. Now, this is what the fountain is good for. If I ever come to a point where I don't have my assistants anymore, if I end my movement on the fountain, I can take the action at the fountain, okay? And if I do that, I then acquire all of my assistants back, all at once. So I'd get to pick up all of my assistants. I wouldn't have to go back for them. They would just automatically come back to the fountain, and then obviously I would be back to having movement and taking various actions all over again. So that's how movement works. Now, remember, if there is a merchant, an opponent's merchant, or just simply another merchant at that location, if I'm going to take the action, I have to first pay that merchant money. And if I don't have enough money, I can't take the action, which also means my assistant won't get left at that location either because I'm not taking the action. So that's how movement's going to work. Now, you'll notice that we have two other cylinders in the game. We have this purple one and this black one. The purple one is the governor, and the black one is the smuggler. These are additional things you can do if you visit a location that they are currently sitting at. Okay? This is another thing you can do. Oh, and I also forgot to mention, when you pay the merchant, so if it's one of these regular merchants that are just simply in the game, once you pay 2 Lyra, you'll roll the dice, and the number that you roll will be the new location of this merchant. So this merchant that is currently sitting here at the small market, this yellow one, is not going to stay there for the whole game. After you pay to the bank 2 money, it's going to move to another location, probably, depending on, obviously, the roll. Now, let's talk about the governor, okay? Let's talk about the governor. Now, that's another thing to note. If there's ever a merchant here, whether it's an opponent's merchant or just a regular merchant, at the fountain, you never have to pay them anything to take the fountain action, which means the fountain is sort of like a free space. You don't have to worry about paying anybody at the fountain, which is nice. So that's another thing to note. Now, the governor, it's a optional thing that you can do. Both the smuggler and the governor is optional. But if you decide you're at a location that has the governor, you can do this. You can take 1 bonus card and then discard 1 bonus card. So you can take a bonus card and then discard a bonus card. But let's say you like both bonus cards. Let's say you already had 1 bonus card and you decided to take the governor action, which is optional, to get another bonus card. But you liked that one as well, and you didn't want to discard a bonus card. You could instead pay 2 Lyra to keep that bonus card, or to keep both bonus cards, if you will. If you had more bonus cards, to keep your bonus cards and not having to discard one, you just have to pay 2 Lyra. So that's kind of a nice little additional thing. You might do that with the governor quite a bit, because those bonus cards do give you a lot of cool stuff. The smuggler is also an optional thing you can do too. So if you're a merchant, if you want to take the action here at this location, this is another option you can do while you're taking your action there. You can, with the smuggler, take 1 good and then give back 1 good, or pay 2 Lyra. So basically, if you go to the smuggler, he's going to give you a resource of your choice, an additional resource. But by doing so, you also have to pay a resource of your choice, basically back to him in a sense. So let's say I wanted 1 more jewelry because I need more jewelry and I'm having a hard time getting the blue jewelry, right? well, I could pay something I'm having an easy time getting. So maybe I get a lot of spice very easily. So I could pay a spice, basically, after he gives me 1 jewelry. So that's basically what the smuggler's good for. But if, let's say, you don't want to pay a resource, you can instead pay the smuggler 2 lyra, basically, which is obviously going to go to the bank as well in order to get the resource. So that's kind of just an optional, additional thing that you can do. Now, if you decide to do that optional thing at that location, after you take that optional ability, you're going to roll the dice once again, and obviously these 2 cylinders, depending on which one you did, the governor or the smuggler, are going to go to a new location all over again. So they will also be moving around. They will not stay in the same place for the entire game. Well, unless you just are unfortunate with rolling and you get the same number, which happens to be where you're at every single time. If that's the case, then yeah, I guess they would stay there for the whole game. But most likely, that is not the case. Now, there's 2 more things to talk about in order to basically explain the rest of this game. We still have bonus cards to talk about, and then these tiles here at the Great Mosque and the Small Mosque. So we'll talk about them in the next video and what they do in the next video. See you guys in the next video.